Well, thank you very much, Greg. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming out today. I know it's a very hot day, and hopefully that you will find our discussions here, informative and hopefully thought-provoking, and would raise some questions. Because while I have a speech here, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book, I'm more interested in kind of hearing what's on your mind in terms of these issues. I mean, there is a lot that is covered in this book, everything from the apparatus itself to the history of the apparatus. And I can't touch on all of that, but if there are particular issues that you're interested in, I'd like to try to answer them for you. As Dr. Kim said in his remarks, this is a very fascinating time to be focusing on North Korean leadership issues. As we noted over the last couple of days, we've had a major turnover within the high command in North Korea, and I think that it has profound implications for not only power dynamics within the regime, but also policy implications for the regime. And that is something I think that could, at some point, impact on the internal security apparatus that we'll be talking about today, as the regime goes forward and tries to put together some new policy initiatives that may have raised some hackles within certain segments of the regime. When Chuck Downs came to me in 2009 about doing a book on the North Korean internal security apparatus, I was thrilled at the opportunity to do such a book, but I was also daunted at the notion of trying to crack into such one of the more opaque aspects of the North Korean regime. While there have been numerous books and memoirs that have cataloged the horrors and the unforgiving nature of the Orwellian state that is North Korea, there's been very little scholarship on the apparatus itself and the personalities that are involved in making sure that the North Korean regime remains stable and that the Kim family remains in power. Scholars such as Andrei Lonkoff have done very good work in trying to give the outlines of the history of the apparatus. And there have been a number of South Korean and Chinese and Japanese scholars who have written and kind of analyzed one or another aspect of the regime, but the problem is that much of this literature is not in English, and also much of it hasn't been published. It is actually in the heads of a lot of different scholars and people who look at these things. And then, of course, there are the books by the committee itself that are a part of this literature and highlight such aspects of the oppression in North Korea as the prison system, which I think was outlined in one of your earlier books that came out last year. This year, David Hawk's book. But to my knowledge, there is no one source where the entire apparatus, from its history to personalities to its organization, national structure, and to its relevance to the regime's culture, has been packaged in one place, and that's what I've tried to do in this book here. This book should not be seen as the last word on the internal security apparatus in North Korea, not by a long shot, for there is much scholarship that remains to be done, and there is more information every day coming out that we have to try to piece together to see what this puzzle looks like in the end. So at most it has pushed the ball down the field a little and added a few more pieces to that puzzle that is the Hermit Kingdom. When I began this project, there were a number of ways that I could go about it. I could have stuck to a cursory examination of the organizational structure and focused on the cultural aspects of the police state. There is a large body of human rights literature that has come out from the Korean Bar Association over the last few years, as well as a number of other bodies that would have provided more than enough material to tell that story. But I decided to take another approach, which is to try to provide as much as possible within the open source a detailed picture about how the apparatus is structured and how it works and who are the key personalities that are responsible for its operation. Essentially a leadership analysis study of the internal security apparatus. This meant not only relying on a wider range and an often very difficult set of sources, both human and written, but also chasing an elusive target that refuses to be nailed down. The research of this book, as I said earlier, began in 2009, so it's been about a 3-year process. From 2009-2010, I conducted extensive research trips to Seoul and Asia, where I met with a number of defectors, such as Hwang Chong-yop, and was able to meet with a number of scholars who have done considerable work on elements of North Korea's internal security apparatus. And with the help of several research assistants, I was able to plow through a great deal of literature on how the North Korean regime has kept and continues to keep its population under control. And this was followed by additional trips in the last couple of years to South Korea, China, and Japan to kind of add a finer point on some of the aspects of this book. But beginning in 2010, a new problem began to crop up in the writing of this book, and it was the fact that the Kim Jong-il regime was coming to a conclusion. The succession process was in full swing. Now, this is not usually a problem for books written on opaque regimes, but when one leader replaces the next leader. But when you're trying to deal with a problem that deals with the apparatus that ensures that smooth transition, an apparatus that is made up of key personalities and power dynamics, all of which can change at a moment's notice, it becomes a daunting challenge. So I wrote the first draft of this book in 2010, and turned it in the summer. And no sooner had I submitted the draft that I had to add an additional section to it because of the third-party conference that happened in September of 2010, which people who were attached to the internal security apparatus played a very important role in terms of some of those promotions. After an additional research trips in South Korea and Japan, I submitted another draft at the end of 2011. And then, of course, Kim Jong-il died. And then I had to go back and do another reevaluation, which I submitted another draft. And then, of course, you had the fourth party conference and the Supreme People's Assembly, which occurred in April, and that led to yet another draft having to be done because of the fact that some critical personalities associated with the police state had shifted and some had gained in prominence while others had disappeared altogether. Now, as for what's in the book itself, it's divided into 3 parts. The first part deals with the apparatus itself and focuses on key elements of the police state. The second part deals with kind of the processes that are involved in the running of the apparatus. And at this point, I'd like to express my gratitude to Chuck Downs, who did the initial edit of the draft and came up with this kind of structure, which I think works very well for what we're trying to do here. And then the third aspect of the draft deals with the history from 1945 until the present, or really up until kind of the end of April. The apparatus, and it talks about the who's who and how the apparatus evolved and a lot of the key power struggles that evolved in North Korean history in which the apparatus was involved in and things such as that. But it becomes clear, and I think this is a major takeaway in the study, although I think it was probably self-evident, is that how critical the police state is to the North Korean regime can be discerned by the fact that its history dates back to the regime's earliest days. As the Soviet Union's 25th Army was rolling through North Korea at the end of World War II and pushing, establishing what would then become the state of North Korea, it started to create bodies, security bodies, along the way that were in charge of a variety of aspects of internal security, and also the court system and the prosecutorial system. These were called bondae, essentially protection and security units. And it was these units, after 1946, when the North Korean state came into being, they were all rolled up into what would become the first internal security organ, which was the Protection and Security Bureau. And this was a rather interesting, for want of a better word, ministry that existed in the cabinet. It was one of the first ones that was created. And it also had very strong ties to the Soviets that were still sitting on the ground in North Korea. they had a lot of their people that were running the day-to-day affairs of that apparatus. And then we saw other aspects of these protection and security units that were in charge of the court system and the prosecutorial system growing up to become what then became the court system and the procurator's office in North Korea. So from the very beginning, in its very early stages, you had the beginnings of what would become the police state in North Korea. And by 1948, in the creation of the North Korean state, the internal security apparatus was alive and thriving. A new massive Ministry of Internal Affairs that boasted some 4,000 to 5,000 employees in its headquarters and oversaw a network of some 12,000 regular police and 3,000 political police down to the village level came into existence. And here we start to see where you can start to pick apart the various elements of what would evolve into the current day security apparatus, and the fact that you had a political police, a secret police that was embedded into this Ministry of Interior. And in the 1950s it would get broken out into a separate organization unto itself. So you had a quite large ministry that is sitting here that is really kind of has a wide variety of missions. Everything from dealing with orphans and beggars and indigents in the regime to investigation of crimes and oversights of prisons. Yes, the North Korean prison system was already starting to be developed by 1948. And supervision of political thought through the secret police apparatus that existed there. So at the very beginning, years before Kim Il-sung would be able to put his stranglehold on this regime, the framework for what would become the daunting police state was already in place and was beginning to expand its mandate that it would do throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Now, I'm not going to bore you with a laborious history of the internal security apparatus. You can find that in part 3 of this book, which deals with the history of the police state. What I will say is that over 3 decades, you've had 3 major police organizations that have emerged out of this apparatus. The State Security Department, also known as the Ministry of State Security, the Ministry of People's Security, and the Military Security Command. Now, I restricted this study to these organizations basically because these are the main parts of the internal security apparatus, and they are the ones that have police functions. There are other parts of the apparatus that ensure the security and stability of the apparatus and the protection of the Kim family, such as the General Guard Command.